Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it's time for Comics Aficionados. We're here to talk about a very important subject. Obviously, I did a video on this earlier in the week, whether or not it's time to let comic shops die. I think Perch did a follow-up video on his channel. He can't be here today because he has been burning the candle at both ends. He's been doing a lot of work in his regular job, moving into a new comic shop, making content. But we definitely have you covered here, and we got a new face on the channel, Jervain Dargan from Animated Concepts. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well today, Wes. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on here. And you're gonna have a small press publishing company with a few comic titles coming up, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So what our plan is, we're looking to do 3 phases. One is to launch a website. 2, then we hope phase 2 would be doing some mini comics, which as some of you would know as ash cans, so little 8-page numbers. And then 3, the final phase would be to launch a comic line. And like we're hoping to launch a comic line starting off with 4 comics and then moving hopefully up to about 10 titles. So unlike some of our competitors, we're not looking to oversaturate the market. We're looking to do our part when it comes to that. But yeah, we're excited about launching the website in February. We were looking to do it this year, but of course our good friend that has affected all of our lives has given us the opportunity to push forward that date. But yeah, that's the plan. Looking forward to being a part of this business once again. So going forward, so excited about it.
Well, congratulations. We're obviously excited for you. Can't wait for your insight into this very interesting topic, since you've obviously been looking at the market yourself. Also here today, we got Ash from Ash on Comics. How you doing, buddy? You still sleeping?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I just woke up. It's hard to take a shower before I start this, so to freshen me up, kind of get going. And it's hard to. I don't know what the hell I'm saying this morning.
It is more
fashionably late. I'm fashionably late as always.
No, you're right on time. Also, the curmudgeon of Critical, Pele. What's going on, buddy?
Actually, it's beautiful outside. I'm feeling pretty good. I think I threw my back out mounting a TV this morning, but I feel pretty good. I'm all right. Let's do this.
Threw your back out. That sounds like fun. Also with us, independent comic book writer Larry Bernard. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Glad to be back on here, and let's talk about some great topics.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, my co-host, he and I, before this started, we recorded the latest edition of Geek Span, which will be on at 5 p.m. tonight. And then we recorded a great video that I think everyone's going to like about Sean Gordon Murphy's Indiegogo campaign. And we might have tied that into Kickstarter and all the issues they're having there. And you're not going to want to miss that one. Should be out on Tuesday. But let's get to the business at hand. Obviously, Pele joined me on the channel. It wasn't really a rebuttal to Comics Explain's video where he said, he said this before in the past, that it's time to let comic shops die. Digital is the future. Whereas I do agree with the last part of that. I do think digital comics are the future of the industry. I'm not quite on board with letting the comic industry die quite yet. Jervain, like I said, you're about to enter the market. You've probably looked at the physical medium, digital medium. Where's the money really to be made? Where's your bread going to be buttered? What did you find out about the market? Is it ready to move away from physical media just to digital?
I would say no. And the example I usually use for this is The Economist magazine. It's something I spoke about in the comment section of that video you were talking about that you and Pele did. And The Economist, for those of you who may not know, is a magazine that a few years ago went fully digital with all of its subscribers. But the way they went to digital was that they spent a lot of time doing surveys with their subscribers over the years to see what their preference was, which was print or digital. And for a long time, the majority of their subscribers preferred print. Economists didn't move to digital until they saw from the surveys that the majority of them have gone there. Now, the Economist never shared what were the reasons why the customers went from print to digital. The customers, I believe, at the time and still tend to be more business, type business type customers and executives. So I would presume that the reason they moved to it was for many of the reasons that I think people do digital comics now. it's portability and to some extent storage, and particularly portability because you can take it with you. And I think with digital, I think digital is definitely going to be a part of the distribution mix, but I don't think it's going to take over completely the print mix, only because there are reasons why people prefer print. Rom Space Knight, I don't know if he's watching this, but he actually did reply to my comment where because I had spoken about my daughters and how they consume basically printed material. And so I had to do a very quick focus group last night with my daughter, a young lady that's staying with us, a house guest, and my wife. And what was interesting about asking the question when it came to books with my daughters, my one daughter said, well, the reason why I like printed books is because reading digital kind of defeats the purpose. So I'm like, what do you mean it defeats the purpose? Well, I said the purpose of reading a printed book is to kind of get yourself away from technology. My other daughter said she didn't like reading books because she just didn't like the way the paper felt. And she didn't like the size of a book while she was reading it. So then I asked her, well, what about comic books? Which one do you prefer, printed or digital? Oh, she said, oh, I like comic books because the paper is silky and smooth. So I guess my point is, and I guess say this, I think, as my wife said towards the end of it, it's going to be both. People are going to choose one distribution method or one way of consuming the product over another based on their personal preferences. I think it's incumbent upon us as an industry is to know what those preferences are. And I think we as an industry in a whole bunch of areas, we just don't know our consumer base as well as we should. I don't even think we know our business base, and that being the retailers as well as we should. And we're not being effective, we're not being efficient, and we're not delivering the experience that our customers, our consumers, these readers are looking for. And so for me, I look at it as we're going to have a combination of print distribution, digital distribution, and just because depending on how things go with the direct market, we're also looking to do something more along the lines of independent distributors, whether it be people who buy the books and sell them on the street corners or sell them in their barbershops or wherever it may be. I think one of the beautiful things what's going on right now is that finally, in terms of the print distribution end, we now have 3 distributors. Competition is good because competition breeds innovation. And I think competition is going to basically now the consumer is going to move a little bit more forward in terms of distributors. And that means consumers being you guys, a lot of you guys who are retailers, them finally having to pay attention to what how they're servicing you, because now they have somebody that they actually have to compete against. So for me, it's a mix of print and digital going forward. And if digital ever takes over, it's only going to take over because the customer base, the consumer, the reader says, yeah, we're ready to do that. But right now, and I've listened to a lot of Rob and I've heard those things right now, and I agree a lot with 1,000% with Pele with his comments about where Rob was coming from, is that, and I think that's a key point. He's a different kind of consumer than somebody who's a print consumer. And I'll stop right there.
Yeah, I don't think digital ever takes over until there's more money to be made digital than physical. And that's obvious. We're not there yet. They haven't figured out their subscription platforms yet. They haven't figured out a good way to deliver digital yet. The Comixology reader isn't very good. The experience on Marvel Unlimited is better, but not quite there yet. They have to get that together first, and then they have to market it correctly and bring in a bigger audience before they'll be even be able to consider moving over. Pele, as a retailer, obviously you talked a good deal about collecting, but there's something about a comic shop that you can't really get through a digital medium. Like I use Netflix. Probably everyone here uses Netflix or some type of streaming service, and there's always that recommended tab for you where it views your viewing history and says these are the things you like, and it's inevitably 95% wrong. It's not none of the movies that you actually want to see because there's no algorithm that can really take into consideration what you liked about the movie. Maybe it isn't the director and the actor. Maybe it was a particular color palette or a setting, something like that. And that's what you get from your local comic shop. You can actually go in there and talk to the retailer. He knows what you like because you have a personal relationship. And that's the real benefit besides community, is that you have somebody that knows your taste and that can help you, with your choices and find the comics that you really want.
Well, I don't think that here's my point on this is as far as I know, and I could be wrong on this, as far as I know, no one collects issues of The Economist. You know, they don't collect issues of The Economist. You know,
Somebody probably has a collection of every.
It's not like comics. It's not like comic books, though. It's not like, you know, they have their big stack, you know, and they put bags and boards and stuff like that, and they put them up. You know, it's digital is quick and dirty reading, and it's fine, but it's not comic collecting, and that's why people, you know, that really get into, you know, comic books, they become collectors, and they like having those comic books on hand. You know, they take up room, but, you know, so does anything that you get into that it becomes a hobby.
So does anything that. The only reason to keep them, though, is because of potential value down the line.
Yeah, well, that and you do accessibility. But, you know, if your tablet breaks, you're going to be able to read your comics. You know, if you're, you know, if you have internet connectivity problems, you know, you're going to be able to connect to Marvel Unlimited. You know, there's a lot of issues there, but it for me, it basically comes down to it's a collectible hobby. And it's the same thing that I talk to with people that are into Magic cards, you know, playing the game Magic the Gathering. There's a lot of people like playing Magic Arena, which is a game centered around that. It's online. But when it comes down to it, the thing that drives that hobby, it still drives that hobby, is collecting the cards. And it's just like with comics, collecting the comics. And I know there's people out there that are screaming at their monitors saying, I don't care about collecting my comics. I don't care what condition they're in. You're not the majority. You're not. People that buy
the
comics...
The majority of comic readers don't collect comics for value. I would almost guarantee that.
They end up doing that in time. Yes, they do. They end up doing that in time because they realize that, oh, my comics do have value. Yeah, you've got people like Sergeant Bats and a few others, you know, who couldn't care less if they throw $20 comic books in the trash. You know, but most people, when they come to a realization that this hobby that they've been buying into for years and years and years, they've got issues that are worth $25, $100, $200, $300, they look back and go, wow, that's some money. And they tap their chin and they think, well, what can I do with this? Can I sell them? Can I, you know? And then they get into that, you know, that beautiful, what I call that beautiful awakening to comics having a financial value, and you know, it's I just don't understand the concept that people are saying that this is going to go all digital. You know, like Rob, God bless his heart. You know, I know that he's trying to stir up some controversy because he likes that stuff. But, you know, it's a collectible hobby. You know, comics are a collectible hobby. Comics are, you know, probably the collectible hobby. You know, as far as, it used to be baseball cards back until the 80s when everything fell apart. But, you know, they are not going to be replaced by digital in the... As far as I'm concerned, they're not going to be replaced by digital. Period. You know,
eventually, absolutely.
Change. No, they won't. No,
yes, they will.
No, they won't.
The whole younger generation, a lot of them they get all of their entertainment.
This younger generation is not the same as the generations that's going to come after that, though. You get into non-material generations and material generations. They're already saying Generation Z is as conservative as the silent generation. You know, the ones that are coming after.
Nothing to do with digital versus physical.
But it has everything to do with materials, the idea of having material goods.
I didn't say there wouldn't be a collector's market for vintage comics. I'm just saying eventually
new comics
won't be produced on paper. They will only
that's not true.
It is
That's not true. They will be replaced. They will be printed on paper because people are still going to want to collect the physical comics.
They still make vinyl records.
So
yeah, they do. That proves my point that vinyl right now is in a surge.
1,000.
Yeah, it's in a surge. They make more vinyl now than they make CDs.
So everybody buys digital.
Well, let me
because people are buying vinyl in record number. They're buying more vinyl today than they did back in the 70s.
Well, let me pipe in with something that Pele was bringing up as a point here. You know how I got into comics? It's because my father introduced me into that. Other male figures in my life introduced me into comics. There's a certain initiatory aspect of the hobby that you're never going to have with digital. You're never going to be a grown up man in his 40s and 50s talking to a kid who's 13 and saying, "Hey, download this app so you can look at the comics." No, you're not going to sell them on the experience and the joy of being comic readers and immersing themselves in the fictional worlds of comics that way. You can only do that with a physical media. And that's the problem, is if comics are supposed to be youth media, then you need to have it in a way that youth will actually engage with it, and that adults will engage the youth in that common hobby.
Yes.
And you're not going to have that with digital.
Well,
Exactly.
Additionally, I mean, look, the issue is that comparing comics, I know the inclination, the natural inclination of people is to compare it to other periodical mediums, except for none of those other periodical mediums, as Pele rightly pointed out, have a collector's market. However, I always come back to a kind of a physical active versus passive entertainment argument on these things. Movies, music are generally going to be, they are passive forms of entertainment. You sit there and do nothing or do literally anything else. You don't actually have to interact with the music or the movie. You don't interact with it. I mean, I know that they've done these weird, like, choose your own adventure movie things recently, but that's just weird nonsense.
That's niche crap.
Video games are different because video games are virtualizations of actual physical activities. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're already dealing with a digitized version of active versus passive. And so that's kind of off to the side. You're still not actually interacting with the content delivery medium. Whereas books and movies, you are, first of all,
books and comics.
Books and comics. They are both evergreen, so that they have, you can pick them up whenever. They are not necessarily tied to a specific point in time. They are not topical. I mean, they can be to some degree, but for the most part, they are not topical in that they have a very short lifespan. Whereas magazines, newspapers, they are very topical. They are a product of their exact publication time. You can't, going back and reading an old newspapers, I mean, other than unless you're just have a general curiosity for a time capsule, there's no point in it. I mean, how many times have we bitched about the fact that the magazines in the dentist's office are like 8 months old? I mean, that's like an ongoing joke because nobody reads them because they are 8 months old. Whereas 8-month-old comics or books, people still pick up. People pick up The Great Gatsby, and that was written, 60 years ago, 80 years ago. Comics and books have both, they are both evergreen and they require an active physical engagement with the entertainment delivery medium. And as a result, people want to physically interact with it. They always have. And they always will to some extent.
My wife's orthodontist, which she finally got her braces off this week, thank God. But my wife's orthodontist is one of my customers, and comes into my shop and gets 50-cent comics, like a stack of them, like about like a foot high, because he does children's orthodontics, and he doesn't get magazines, newspapers, and stuff like that. He's like, I can buy a whole stack of comics, put them in my waiting room, and the kids just sit there just reading comics the whole time while they're waiting. And then the adults pick up the comics and they read them while they're waiting. He's like, and he says, it's awesome because I don't have to replace the magazines. He just buys the cheap comics until they're just physically, torn all to pieces, then he buys some more. It's an evergreen hobby. It's not, like Doc said, it's not topical within that period of time. A comic book that was printed in the 1980s is just as entertaining as a comic book that was printed recently.
But
You know,
a
or it can
newspaper
be.
or a magazine is not. There's
Exactly.
no interest. I mean, yeah, of course, as somebody said in the chat, somebody always has that aunt that has TV guides going back to the 70s. But
Yeah,
outside
my
of a
dad does.
outside of a
Yeah, so so I just want to clarify my point and bring up the economists, which was not to make a one-to-one comparison between comics as a periodical medium and magazines and newspapers.
Oh
I've
yeah. Oh, I understand. I
yeah,
understand.
yeah. So I've gone to SCORE and have had this discussion where they pair you up with people who were executives in the periodical business, and when I explain to them how the comic business works, they all sit there with their mouths open and gaping just based on the returnability factor alone. The point was with the economist example is that what the problem with Rob's argument is that he's presuming that the comic book consumer, whoever they may be, prefers digital. And it's just not true. And it's not true for any other reason than if you talk, even when I spoke with my little mini focus group last night, the young lady who stays with us, who is not a comic consumer, doesn't read comics, is not into it. The first thing she said, which is what you said, Pele, is that the first thing came to my mind, as she said, was it's a collectible hobby. That's why it'll never go all the way digital, because that's what it is. It's you're right. You will have that one person who collects TV guides because they like TV guides. But the beauty of comics is, and that's always what the beauty of comics is, and they sometimes get a bad rap is, which is continuity. So when we think about all the ways that we all have come into comics, my big thing with coming to comics always was it was either my cousin's trunk at my grandmother's house where he had a stack of comics in the trunk and I would read through them and he would give me one once in a while, or I would come across one back in the day in the newsstand and you would get hooked on that one book, that one story, and then you just wanted more. You wanted to see more of what it was. That's where the local comic book shop comes in. That's where the local comic book shop comes in. Because when I picked up New Warriors #2 on the newsstand one time, I wanted New Warriors #1. So I had to go 40 minutes to find a local comic book shop to get that first one. So I just want to clarify that the point of the comics thing is not to say one-to-one, but that we need to understand and know our customers.
Yeah, I understand. I wasn't trying to come after you at all. No, that was not my intention whatsoever.
So I do want to say thank you very much to No Nerd for the $10 super chat super sticker. Who dat? Thank you very much, good sir. Now I did want to bring up some of the points from the comments on the actual video we had. There's a lot of comments, a lot of great comments. Obviously, that's where Gervain came in. I saw his comment. I was like, we should probably bring him on the channel. We talked a little bit offline. And I'm glad you're able to make it today. So here's the first one. This is from Tractor Nation. Comics will be a small, dusty corner in the back of hobby shops, while the other 90% will be toys, video games, etc. It happened to CDs, cassettes, and every other media format that dies. Ash, what do you say about that one?
Sorry.
Well, I think that these other forms that have died, you're not taking into consideration the thing that I've been hearing talked at length is about the collectability. They're not the same type of thing. Music is something that you just consume purely for the consumption of, the entertainment, the music. You watch a movie on Netflix, you're consuming it purely just to absorb the movie and enjoy the experience of the movie. Some people do buy comics to just consume it and read it and be done with it, and that's the case. And I think those people make this argument because to them they don't understand the other side of the fence, and they don't understand the collector that Pele is describing. It doesn't make sense to them, and so to them they see music, movies, comics, it's just all the same thing, so therefore it's all going to follow the same path. But they don't. If you think of comics in the way of like baseball cards died because they couldn't go digital. And no one's gonna get them digital. It's not.
Baseball
Magic
cards died because they overprinted them and became not valuable.
The crap out of them. Yeah.
The market for the physical died on that, but I'm just saying they couldn't ever go digital. That's the point.
There's no artwork in baseball.
There's no artwork in baseball, but even like collector cards in general, any sort of, you're not going to have digital stamps. No one's going to collect digital coins. It's something that And when I go to the comic book store and I see these whales that are buying stacks of comics, you have to understand that these are the guys that are propping up the industry. Now, someone who's listening to me jabber on right now might just be, I buy my comics and I read them and I don't care. I'm happy to buy them on digital. I'll throw physicals away. There's no collectability to me. That's okay. That's fine. I get that there's people like that, but you're not propping up the industry. Believe me, the guy who comes up to the counter and his comic book bill is $500, that guy's really helping keep things going. And if digital goes away, those guys aren't buying $500 in digital comics every week. Marvel's not selling, 20 variant covers digitally, right? You're not selling reprints of comics digitally. Yes, you can have a digital market, and digital has a place in the future for sure. And I'm one of the biggest advocates of reading comics digitally. I get on, I was talking in your Discord last night about my enjoyment of reading comics digitally. I love reading them digitally, but I've told people before many times over, I will not buy a new comic digital. Digital for me is the discount bin. Like, oh, hey, I can get this trade paperback for 99 cents. I always wanted to read that story. I'm happy to get the digital copy of that. But if you're going to sell me a $3.99, $4.99, $10.99 or whatever, the price of comics go up, or I'm not buying that digitally. No way. The reason I get comics at all, and I wanted to kind of comment on Pele's point earlier just about the value. I think some people get a disconnect on his point because not everyone's a speculator. Right. I'm not a speculator, but I'll pay $3.99 for my comic, not because I think it's going to go up and be worth $100, but because it'll probably have that $3.99 value. It has an inherent value. And later on, if for some reason I decide, you know what, I want to get out of comics or whatever, I can offload on eBay. I can be like, here's my Batman collection. Someone buy it. I can't do that with digital. It's the reason I used to be a pretty hardcore Magic player in earlier days, and I would pay the exorbitant prices for Magic cards because I knew when I wanted to get out of the hobby, should that ever come, I can offload these cards. They have some inherent value. If someone was going to say, hey, you can play that same game of Magic the Gathering, but you're going to do it digitally, I'm like, nah. I know some people will, but it's not going to be to the same level to support that particular industry. And I don't think comics can. I know people will buy digital, but already it's a small enough market. I think digital is somewhere between 6 and 10% floats around. The current numbers of physical copies buyers is barely enough to sustain this industry. Drop that down to now the digital numbers, and it just goes away. You can't pay for the same level of talent. You can't have the industry as we know it at those small levels. And I think the future is finding a way to have both. I think the future is having that niche physical copies for the collectors, and having those shops. And then some people like the youth who are like, I don't know anything about physical. My whole world's digital. And maybe they read some digital stuff, maybe. But you look at the way of manga, and you go, they're not succeeding digitally, at least not in the West, the way comics want to. You've got Viz, who offers a service that it's all their comics for $12.99.
So I do have to say Thank you very much to Kenneth Dowling for the $20 super chat. Thank you for supporting the channel. That's very generous. Watch the video on Joker War. One reason we're being inundated with Joker content is because Joaquin Phoenix just won the Oscar for playing him. Joker popularity is a fever pitch. DC is using that to bring people back to shops. What do you think about that one, Larry Bernard?
Well, obviously, I think that's a happy coincidence because Joker's always been a fairly popular character. So there's always going to be a market for more Joker content. But to the point about the digital content, I just did a little quick.
We were talking about the guy that just gave you $20. Yeah, I do agree with you. They're absolutely using Batman. They're using Joker to bring people back into the shops. If you look at what Marvel's strategy is, they don't have anything big coming out. We don't get X-Men at least until August, I believe. Where's Ten of Swords? I don't think Empire is even really on there. The only thing, I guess they're picking up Iron Man 2020 right now. DC's going all in. They're going hard in the paint. We got, Darth Dark Knight's Death Metal. We got Joker War. We've got 3 Jokers coming out. DC is definitely using Batman and Joker to prop things up, get people to come into the shops, and hopefully, propel themselves to being the number one as far as market share in the industry. Like I said, thank you very much, Kenneth Dowling.
Yeah.
Very generous of you to support the channel like that. So we did have a lot of questions, and I want to get to another one. This is one from Nicholas Burns. The problem is product diversification, or rather lack thereof. If comic shops don't diversify, they will fail. Pele, what do you say about that? Obviously, you run a very successful comic shop.
Yeah, that's dead on the nose there. It's on the money. You can't just have new comics now and succeed. Maybe if you have a very niche area, like you're in the central part of Chicago, and you have just tons and tons of customers that buy new comics. Yeah, but the average store, no. You're going to have these shops are. If they haven't already, they're going to have to diversify. I've already talked to a lot of shops that are looking for advice on how to get into vintage comics and back issues, because they do not have anything but their new comics, and they're struggling, and they're going to fail, if something doesn't happen. And and this whole situation with Diamond and with Marvel and DC just exacerbated the whole problem and sped up what was going to happen eventually anyway. People, they were kind of like running on fumes anyway. A lot of these stores, and they weren't going to survive for the long run as it was. This just sort of revealed the flaws a lot more quickly. But anyway, to get on back onto that, there's a lot of different ways of these shops. You don't have to just get into vintage and back issues. There's other things that you can do, the toys and although I don't recommend that might be good for somebody else in a different area. But it's just find something else that you really enjoy doing, and kind of try to integrate that with your comic shop, and see if you can make that work. There's a really, really good shop in Bristol that runs comic book shops and vinyl, and he runs he sells new comics, and he sells vintage vinyl, and he does a really great job with it. And he added the vinyl on within the last couple of years, and he's been very happy with that. So there's other ways to diversify, not just along to a formula. It doesn't have to be the way that other people are doing it, but you do have to find a way to expand and to make yourself more attractive to a broader customer base.
So, Pele, do you think it's important for comic shop owners, to not really think of themselves so much as a service industry or providing a service, and really more of an experience industry, where when you come in here, you get more than just a product. You get the community, but maybe there's other things that are available in the shop that really keep you coming back, whether it's tabletop gaming, other interactive ways to keep people coming in and engage while they're actually in the shop.
Yeah, that's been fairly popular for a while, is to have the Magic area. A lot of people buying Magic cards and buying Warhammer type gaming supplies and figures and such. The only problem with that is Magic's going through its own kind of implosion period right now. But they're setting the ship faster than the comics industry is, but they still had a major setback. But it really depends. I don't recommend anybody opening a Magic shop right now. Anybody opening a Magic the Gathering or card shop right now, that would be practical suicide, because of the way that certain political and financial situation is going right now in Magic. But I do think that integrating certain aspects of that could be very beneficial. I know a lot of people make a lot of money off refreshments. Usually drinks and comics don't mix, but I do know a lot of shops that are fairly successful selling refreshments. There are other shops that have a video game type of experience, or they have an internet cafe added on or something like that. It's what it depends on your market, what your customer base is like, and to kind
There
of
you
get
go.
a feeler out there for what the demand is.
Movies are having to do the same thing. You can't just offer movie night really anymore. People want a premium movie experience, whether it be meals or they want a full bar there, or maybe they want a cool bowling alley, something else to bring them in and keep them there for a little while and spend some more money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go to a movie theater that has a really nice arcade attached to it, and it's shocking, really. Their arcade's probably better than just about anywhere else in the East Coast. But they've got the arcade, they've got a bowling alley attached to it, they've got the theater itself, which is an amazing theater that sells. You don't eat in the theater, but there's a sandwich. There's like a shop there attached to it, and then you can have. You don't eat in the theater, but you can have drinks. You can have a beer, you can have a glass of wine while you're watching the movie, and it's a very rich type of social experience when you go there, and I miss it. It's a great place to go and watch a movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's everything's kind of changing now with the digital. It is becoming more popular, obviously, with streaming and stuff. That's a much bigger, probably immediate threat to movie theaters than probably to comic shops.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Dragon Maris 59110 is actually in the chats right now. He had the next comment. The whole idea that comics can have more value, collectors, grading, investors are exactly what ruined comic books and made it out of reach for most people. Doc, I know you have a valuable comic book collection, maybe not as valuable as Pele's, and you have some very pristine, choice X-Men comics. Do you think you're part of the reason that comic books are out of the reach for regular Joes like me and Ash?
No. Look, everything. Some things gain value, some things lose value over time. I can go out and pick up probably 99% of my collection out of, if I spend enough time, out of dollar bins or under $5 back issues. There is, literally in many cases, most cases below cover price. How does that, yes, it puts key books. It can put key books out of the reach of some collectors or some readers, but most of those key books have reprints available somewhere. Second prints.
I love the True Believers. I love the facsimile editions. I think those are even better, especially the DC ones with the really badass paper.
Yeah, like there's ways if you're just talking about reading the story. If you're not, you have two options. Well, excluding digital, just in print comics, you have either paying the price for a original first print, or buy one of the dozens and dozens and dozens versions of one of the reprints of any of these key books. There's at least a reprint of almost every single key book at this point. Hell, even back in the 90s when I was reading, you had the Marvel Milestone with the silver like picture frame border around the cover. I could read X-Men 1 if I wanted to that way. Mm-hmm. I could go read Hulk 181. I could get that. There was they reprinted giant sized X-Men as like X-Men Super Size Adventure back in the mid 80s. So all of these things, and you could still find that book in dollar bins all over the country.
Well, you're thinking, just from an American perspective. Obviously, I'm here in the Philippines. I don't even have a comic shop near me, even on my island. I know we do have some viewers that are out there in Europe. They've kind of gone away from comic books as floppies, and they're more into like graphic novels and stuff. That's where Ash and I definitely agree on something. I prefer to read trades in long stories in digital because I can normally, if I can wait out the time limit, I can find a deal on Comixology where you might get it for 70% off of the cover price. And it's easier to read it that way. And then, whenever I read my trades that I do have in physical, because I like having them in physical, like I miss out on some of the art in the middle, and that always bothers me, especially if it's a great double page spread. So that's where one of the things where I think digital really accentuates the hobby of reading comics or even collecting comics, because you can go through and read all those things and not have to maybe fudge up the high dollar comic that you paid for, and you can just get through the stories. I know, Ash, you feel kind of the same way. You prefer reading your trades on digital.
I prefer reading all my comics on digital these days, whatever it is. When sometimes I get a comic that I can't get digitally, I'm just like, oh, I got to read this physically. And it's really weird because I support everyone who's like, I love the digital or the physical. I love the paper. I love the tactile feel. I love the smell. I relate to all that. I've been that person. I still kind of am that person, but I'm so spoiled by the digital experience. And I think if you have the good, it's all really about your hardware. If you're reading digital on a phone, it's going to suck. Even reading on a PC, I don't enjoy it because the PC screen, unless you've got a gigantic, 30-inch monitor or bigger, that's going to be difficult. But on a good tablet with a super high res crisp screen, it's beautiful and it's easy to hold, and it just, there's so many good points about it. I just want to say one real quick thing about Dragon Bear's comment to consider is that while it may make sense that collectors have put these comics out of reach, I can't go back and read first appearance of Deadpool because it's $1,000 comic. Well, despite the arguments about the reprints and stuff, consider this: before collectors, comics just went away. They're gone. You're like, I want to read Superman #1. It's gone. There's no way you're going to read it. It wasn't until collectors were like coming on the scene, formulated a marketplace where people said, hey, I'm going to make a shop that just sells these things, that you even had an opportunity to even get back issues. And it wasn't even until that became a huge thing that the market, like Marvel and DC, were like, you know what? We should collect these things in trades and reprint them because people want to go back and read all this old stuff. So honestly, I would make the argument that it's the opposite. The idea that comics have values and there's back issues has created a whole wealth of opportunity for people to read old comics that wouldn't have existed previously.
I mean, I've got some Golden Age books that, there's 10 of them in existence, or there's 20 of them in existence. And they would not exist if collectors hadn't went out there, found them, preserved them, and, kept them safe. Because, we mill through paper like nobody's business. And, recently there's like some EC comic that was found that did not exist anymore. Somebody's like, oh God, this comic just does not exist anymore, and they're like fretting and upset, and they found it. They found a copy of it, and it was about to be thrown into somebody's waste bin when they're cleaning out an attic. Boom, we've got a copy of it now in existence. If it didn't have value and there wasn't a collector there to scoop it up and take care of it, that piece of history would be lost. So no, I don't buy the thing about collectors ruining that. If anything, making it collectible and giving it a value and creating a community around comics, collecting as far as vintage comics, they just would not exist. It would be that piece of history would be gone.
And I like to throw in this bit about that. One thing about, in terms of the price of entry, which that seems to be what he's talking about, you have the True Believers line from Marvel, which I think is a great way to introduce people. You used to have stuff like classic X-Men and Marvel Tales, which were great ways if you wanted to read those old Spider-Man comics, those X-Men issues. They should do more on that. But I think one thing that is left out of it is, and I know because I read Perch's article on this about why comic book prices can't go back, but for a lot of people, $3.99 is not a sampling price. $4.99 is not a sampling price. $7.99 is not a sampling price. Even when you're talking about when the earlier comment about media formats, when it comes to CDs and cassettes, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the problem with CDs was just the price, and customers were very educated. They were paying $16 for a product where there only were 2 songs on it that you liked, and then even those 2 songs, if you try to get them individually, they cost anywhere from $5 to $7 by themselves. It's just, I think a lot of times when we're talking about, and I always appreciate Purchase perspective on this when he talks about who needs to be involved in the industry and moving it forward, is that you really need more people who understand overall marketing. Because marketing is not just the product, it's the price, it's the place, it's the promotion. All of these things in various ways contribute to why a media format can go the way of the dodo. Because I agree with Pele. When it comes to vinyl coming back, which I think once CDs took over, nobody thought that would happen. But I think one of the reasons why vinyl is making a comeback is that, with all due respect, at least in my circles, people always prefer the sound of vinyl to CD. Period.
Yes.
The fact that you now come
it
up
does
with
have a less dynamic, more mellow,
there you go,
relaxed sound. Yeah.
And now that you've come up with and now using technology, a turntable that I can use to plug into my computer via my USB, I'm good. All my records have now become new again. And I can share them with my kids and play them. So I think sometimes we just overlook all in terms of marketing, all the different ways that if you're not keeping up, or if you're not being if you're not listening to the consumer, you end up getting left behind. I used to manage 2 video stores in New York. So I'm talking about in the heyday of when Netflix first started. We didn't go down because of digital. If some of you may remember, Enron back in the heyday where we were trading, when there was that big deal about Blockbuster doing video on demand, nobody was worried about digital because we knew one thing: the technology wasn't there. The technology wasn't there. The infrastructure wasn't there. It wasn't going to happen. You know what actually did us in? Mail order. Netflix, mail-in movies and DVDs anytime you want. They do exactly what they do now with coming into your brick and mortar store to kind of see what the book is like, to see what it is, talk to the owner or talk to the employee, get a feel for it, then walk out the store and order it online. When we were running the video rental business, we saw our traffic during the week drop to almost 25% of what it used to be. And that's because when people spend that weekday time kind of catching up on movies they already know about, they don't come into the store. They would just order it off of Netflix because and why? Because they came in on the weekend to pick up their new movies. They spend time talking to us, getting recommendations, then they would walk out the store on the Sunday and we wouldn't see them again till the next Friday when new movies came out. So yeah, it's a mix of things, but media formats go away for a number of reasons. CDs went away because they were charging too much money. Everybody knew those CDs cost about 10 cents to manufacture, and because of the way they were pricing it, everyone got the perceived value of a song as being $1. That's why, other than Apple coming up with a really nice looking MP3 player, the simple fact of the matter is they got the price right. It was $1 a song, and it was off to the races.
Another thing we're talking about vinyl is that so often what people don't pay attention to is that when CDs came out, they were quick and dirty and everything like that. You could get your music on a more portable format and all that.
Yep.
But vinyl, you had this beautiful gatefold, sleeve, and you had all this artwork that was inside of it, and you had, the liner notes, and you had all this other kind of stuff, and you had all this stuff that you could experience at the same time while you're listening to that vinyl. So not only do you have the more pleasing audio experience of vinyl, but people, this is artwork, this beautiful artwork that's on this vinyl, and it's a good sized piece of artwork, and you've got all this other stuff that you can enjoy inside of it. So, it's a different, it's a interactive experience too. Like going back to what Doc was saying a while back, it's turned into like an interactive type of experience as well. So that's one of the reasons why vinyl has gotten more attractive later.
Hold up, guys.
Well,
it's my show.
Okay.
People need to give up the ghost. Digital will dominate in time. Physical comics are becoming so damn expensive for kids to get on board. That was from Sean Fry. Larry Bernard, is the price point too expensive to get new readers on board as far as kids? There's not a lot of kids really, or a lot of comics that are aimed at kids anyway right now.
Well, that's one of the big problems with the comics industry. They don't know who they're aiming for. But I pulled up a link here. Somebody who did the research on it. Digital only for physical books, that's 7% of the market. It's been 6 to 7% of the market consistently. Digital sales are going down year over year over the last 5 years. And what's selling is physical media and audiobooks. So it's not necessarily so that digital's going to be the wave of the future. And a lot of people who buy digital also buy physical. So it's our friend from Chicago's point, it's all about marketing. If you want digital to be the dominant format, you got to say, okay, buy your book, get a digital copy. And then you tie that into how you bring people into the hobby. You share that digital copy with somebody saying, and then you share them the experience, which again goes to the other point of having a physical comic book, having a physical media. You make the digital the gateway, and then the comics become the gateway into the broader series of products that are being sold through these multi-billion-dollar entertainment companies that are being produced basically for less than what their advertising is for their billion-dollar movies.
Well,
And understand this: customers are not stupid. First of all, DC and Marvel did a great job of educating all of us, even with the combo packs when they first started, that the perceived value of a digital comic is $1. And customers realize that if you're charging them $3.99 for a digital copy and $3.99 for a physical copy, it kicks in when they go, why would I give you $3.99 for a digital copy when you don't have any of the printing costs, any of the shipping costs, any of the manufacturing costs? They are not dumb. They are not dumb, because Round Space Knight, Round Space Knight made that point. They says part of the reason he felt digital wasn't being adopted was because of the price. If we don't have sampling prices, if we don't have products for a new generation to sample, even people who are comics curious to sample, you are not going to bring these people in. You're not going to get these people into the comic shop. I go back to what I said before. If we all think about how we ended up at an LCS at a local comic shop, I promise you it was someplace else other than a local comic shop.
yes.
Discovery is a thing that digital has really never done well. It's never done discovery well. Even curation to a point, I might give them curation, but it's never done discovery well. When I buy a comic, I even miss in the comics when the characters will be talking about something, and they used to have in the little thing in the box, see issues 59 through 56 or 56 through 59 for what they're talking about. And that was definitely a driver for me. Now that we had comic book shops, to go find issue 56 to 59. So discovery is key. Go ahead.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. You have a couple of issues, and it comes back to a lot of the things. I mean, I think that they, from probably the 60s through it got better in the 70s with the advent of the direct market, but up through the 90s and early 2000s, you had that funnel system of both impulse buy, price points, and comics being in normie spaces that would eventually you'd start picking up comics, you'd miss an issue here or there and you'd be like, damn, how do I get that? And then you'd end up talking to other people that do read comics, because everybody when you have an interest, you inevitably find other people that have that interest. You start talking to people, you start learning stuff about comics, and they tell you, oh yeah, there's this comic shop. Wait, there's a whole shop for comics? What the hell? I need to go there. And that's how most people ended up into it. Between the impulse buy and the normie spaces. And the problem with digital, when you get to deal with people finding stuff, is it's terrible for, and this is my problem kind of in general with digital. There's no way you're not going to be walking through the digital Walmart or the digital 7-Eleven and just look over to your right and, oh wait, there's comics right there. You don't see that. There's no, what are you going to do? You're going to put it in ads? How many people run ad blockers? You need to have it in, digital needs to figure out how to be that spinner rack sitting 5 feet away from the cash register at the 7-Eleven or the pharmacy in a way that it hasn't figured out yet, and that the comic industry has generally stopped seeing as important. But at the same time, I keep saying it. At this point, I'm of the complete opinion that the comic book industry is entered an entropy phase and hasn't figured out how to figure its way out.
One of the things my wife was commenting about is, I see all these Marvel movies. We just got through watching a bunch of Marvel films again, and she's like, all of these Marvel movies, and none of them are talking about, none of them actually promote the comics. It's like you buy the Blu-ray, there's nothing about comics. You buy, you go, there's a few instances where you went to the movies and they gave away a free comic book, but it wasn't like prevalent. why weren't they doing that? Why weren't they doing it? Every single Marvel premiere, every single, you get a free comic with your movie ticket. Here, buy these comics. We've got comics for sale. We sell this every month. After you leave the theater, there's this huge resource of comics out there that you can enjoy around this character, around these adventures. They didn't do that, and that was the biggest mistake that Marvel made, that Disney made during this entire situation. Is they forgot that they own a comic book company. They just took the resources and the characters, made movies, and then abandoned the comic industry.
Well, I think one of the ways that might be a good possibility is, okay, say you're watching HBO Max and you're watching a DC show that's on there. At that point, at the end, the next track, when you're watching a series and you get to the end of the season, how about just sticking on a digital comic as the next episode so that they can watch that, or they can read it and be like, oh, wait, the comic, maybe I'll start reading the comic. There's a lot of ways they can do it to integrate, have some product synergy between their comics and their streaming services. Now, that is one way the digital comics could work as that spinner rack, because you're already there buying something else. But it's still not helping for, if you're out. I mean, come on. What did most of us do? We were at the pharmacy with our mom and just kind of standing there looking around, bored as hell. And we'd see the comic book spinner or the rack right over near where we were standing. And we'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to stand here and read these magazines while you do your shopping. And then all of a sudden we're like, hey, Mom, can we buy this? And then we start becoming regular readers.
Yeah,
that is
the point they were cheap enough to where it was like, 35 cents, 40 cents. Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, give me that.
Sample.
Even $1.
Yeah. Yes, I am. I'll add that to my order here. And then you have your comic and you're sitting in the back of it. You're reading it before you even get home. And that was every single week. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids were doing this, and
they were discovering it for the first time.
Yeah. And
even if only 10% continue, you're still getting tens of thousands of new readers. As you might be losing 5,000, but you're gaining 10,000 new ones. Every and you're churning that reader pool. There's going to be a large subsection that sticks around the whole time, but that you'll also be pulling in new ones. As it stands right now, it's in an entropy phase where it's just feeding off of the same customers and losing new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we do have another idea for bringing people into comic shops. This is from Ryan Wilson, longtime viewer of the channel. He's always in the comments. I think if Walmart and other companies sell comics, it will help local comic shops. You need places like Walmart, I'm assuming it means like Target, to get new customers who don't normally buy comics. And there are some comic books available at Walmart. Larry, do you think like some of these big box retailers having some discounted comics or graphic novels more available would further generate new people coming into comic shops?
I think it would help because of the classic C issue X, Y, and Z for a problem, but the comic book industry also needs to kind of have a come to Jesus moment, because I don't think they know for a lot of the comics they're selling today who their audience is. And more importantly, kids today are different than we were. We had more disposable income of our own. We were more apt to do a job do chores to get money, mow a neighbor's yard to get some money. Kids today are much more dependent on their parents for money, which is part of why comics have been able to go up so much higher in value and become so much less of a disposable income for kids. So if comic prices are going to stay where they are, and it's going to be targeting people who aren't kids, then it needs to have a certain physical quality to it.
And I'll jump in on that as a parent who is trying to introduce their kids to the comic hobby, and also to the piece of from the animated concept piece in terms of distribution. So with the kids of the hobby, you're absolutely right. When I used to work in the video store, I used to always play Dragon Ball Z, Justice League on the monitors. Parents, their kids would get interested. They go downtown, be out for an outing. the parent was like, look, God, I love Dragon Ball Z. I'm glad your kid introduced you to it. If those guys think I'm going to pay $5 for a Dragon Ball Z comic, they're out of their damn minds. And to the gentleman's point he just spoke, you have to realize who you're targeting. If the idea is, or the fact is, that kids are going to have the disposable income, it's just like if your kid had to buy a toy. You have to convince the parent. You have to create a price point that's attractive to the parent to say, oh, when Johnny asked me to buy this $5 comic here, or if I pick it up and I like the Walmart comics, it's got like 100 pages of content. Oh, that's a good deal. I'll pick that up, give it to my kid. And if I'm knowledgeable about a local comic book shop, or if somebody in Walmart was knowledgeable about, hey, if you like that, you should check out Dark Tower Comics up in such a place. They've got a great selection. That funnel system has to be there. And the second part, in terms of, and Ryan makes a great point, for us at Animated Concepts, where we're looking at in terms of distribution, while we don't necessarily want to deal with Walmart at this point because of the way they kind of get you entrenched into their business, definitely we're looking at dollar stores like Dollar Tree, Dollar General, and Family Dollar. And the main reason we're looking at those stores were really three reasons. One, there was a study by the United States Postal Service which said that most people try to do their shopping, or like to do their shopping, within 5 to 10 minutes of where they live. If there's any place that's within 5 to 10 minutes of where you live, it's either one of those three stores or Walgreens. And Walgreens, much like Walmart, has its issues in terms of that. The other problem that comes up with going into a Walmart or other companies, one of my suppliers had a great deal of interest from Dollar Tree in terms of carrying comics. They were literally thinking about that whole thing of like, you have like 5 comics in a bag, and you sell them for $5 and this kind of thing. The only issue that you're going to have dealing with those stores is returns. That was the deal breaker. It's like Dollar Tree and dealing with this guy who not only was a printer but also had his own comic line. They cannot come to a reasonable return policy. It's like, I know Double Do Comics, if all the stories are to be believed, that's part of what drove them out of business, was that 18 months later, Barnes & Noble basically returned a whole ton of product that they bought, and it pretty much put them out of business. But it's that returns issue, and I don't know how DC is handling it with Walmart in terms of the $5 comics are doing. But it's my understanding the $5 comics do well. I just don't know, much like with the Marvel movies, if they translate into more comic sales. Because you don't have an immediate place that if the kid goes, oh, Crisis on Infinite Earths Giant Special was great. Oh, where else can I get something like this? There's not that place to do that. I was not a comics fan to start with. I was an animation fan. I was a huge fan of Super Friends. When I saw the little bumper at the end that said, oh, check out Justice League Comics, and I walked into a newsstand and got a Justice League comic with a brand new story, great art and all that, and I said, wait a minute. This joint comes out every month, and there's new stories about the characters I like in the Super Friends show. I was done. I was in like Flynn. So go ahead, Paley, you're going to jump in.
I was just going to make a quick comment. It really depends as far as the Walmart situation and selling comics and selling magazines. Basically comes down to how that manager sets that up and makes that available. I've been in Walmarts where the comic books are like in the corner, you don't see them, you don't even know they're there. They're in a place where nobody goes to, that like where the bargain crap is, where there's closeout stuff, and they've got it kind of shoved in there. And then there's the Walmart my cousin manages, that she puts the comics right there. She said, where could I put these? She asked me, where could I put these to sell these? Well, they're right there at the front door. Right there next to where the express register is. Where the main doors front, and the entry and out, in and out doors there, the main bank of doors, and where the express register is, boom, comics are right there. Magic the Gathering cards are right there. All the stuff, it's hobby and everything related, is right there at that register. Everybody can see it. As soon as you walk in, you can see the comics displayed right there on the left. And she says, man, they sell. You would not believe. And she brought it up to the other managers' meetings because they were saying that, we don't want those things, they don't sell. And she's like, well, you're not putting them in the right place. You got to put them where people see them. And she sells more comics and more cards and more stuff like that than any other Walmart in her region because of location. And that's why
Yeah, that's why a whole generation knows Archie comics, if nothing else.
Yeah, and you know, a quick point to this, you know, a little testimony about when I got into comics. I didn't know about comic book shops. I went into, I think it was a drugstore called Save On, and I walked in, and, you know, and I knew about comics, and because I had seen them before. Went to the little, you know, the newsstand area where they sell the magazines, you know, and I bought my comics, and then I found out that there was a comic book store in my area that I could ride my bike to. So I was like, oh, neat. So I rode my bike, and I walked in, and it was like a sense of wonder. I was like, oh my goodness. And my world opened up as little 13-year-old Ash was like, I already knew I could get comics at the store. I didn't know about other stores. So I don't think that that's a requirement when some people bring up the idea of like, well, is that really going to translate into, yes, maybe, for sure. Like, you don't have to know. I think one of the big keys of getting comics in places like Walmart is just for cultural reasons, so that people know that this is a product that exists. There's a lot of people that are like, there's still comics? I didn't know they still made comics. Like, what?
Yeah,
that is true. Yep.
And people don't realize this, that and people find comics, and that's part of the deal, is just getting that exposure. Not everyone's going to get into comics because they saw something at Walmart, but if one in even 10,000 people, that's a huge deal. Comics right now has such a small market that even getting 10,000 people in all of America to come into comics hobby would be a big thing. So I don't know. I think that's a really good idea. I think it's really important, is getting that exposure.
Yeah. But I think the thing is that, to your point about the fact that people don't even realize that comics exist, because I've heard that 1,000 times from 1,000 people, if they see me reading the bus, they still make those. But part of that is because they're nowhere to be found.
Yep.
They're nowhere to be. I mean, now I talked with Mike Gold, who some of you may know, who was DC marketing, and as he was helping me go over the plan for the business, stuff like that. And he asked me a question. So as you all can tell, I am Black, African American. He said, in the Black and African American communities, what's the comic store situation look like? So I had to laugh. The reason why I laughed is because, other than and I'm doing a plug for First Aid Comics in Hyde Park, here in Chicago, Illinois. What's up, James? Great guy, great store. Before James opened that comic book in Hyde Park, and I was living on the South Side, I would have to go either an hour to 90 minutes either way from where I live just to get to a local comic book shop, just to purchase a comic. If I was even to go to Grand Crackers, which is downtown, if I was driving, I have to put $25 on to park downtown to even go in the comic store, which is half my buying budget to begin with. Or I still would have to spend an hour and a half riding public transportation to get downtown to find a comic shop and do my comic shopping. The fact that these books, this product that we love, is not in more places for people to discover, you're not even gonna get that 1 in 10,000 translation. Because it's one thing to have it in a Walmart, which most people frequent. But even I can tell you, and here on the west side of Chicago, there's there are Walmarts which are basically an hour apart. And if I don't happen to go out to that Walmart, my daughters, other kids in this neighborhood are never going to see that comic book. They're never going to be aware of its existence. So until it gets into more places, and my big thing is, I'm with Ryan when he says other companies, it's those dollar stores and or Walgreens. Walmarts, at least in urban areas, are not as prominent as dollar stores or a Walgreens. Until you get them there, unless they know someone, like my daughters know their dad, they do not know that comic books exist. The cartoons help. Batman, Brave and the Bold. That show, based on what they were doing and the way they were translating what used to be thought of as the confusing continuity of DC Comics, that show did such a great job of streamlining all of that DC history and continuity that I could have walked my daughters into a store like Pele's and they would go, "Ooh, Wildcat, DC Brave and the Bold. Can we get that, Dad?" Because that's how damn good that show was at translating all that history and that product. It was just a great show. I just didn't think they took full advantage of it. You had the Golden Age Flash, of all people, headline on a cartoon. Come on, that's...
Yeah, I mean, all you needed was a 10-second thing at the end with the comic shop locator ad right at the end. Done. every
wanna
episode.
say, thank you very much to Walesy for the $4.99 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Big fan of this channel. I'm a big fan of yours, and thank you very much. We have another one. This is from Cliff Elor. Disney Plus is the same amount of price of like one monthly book of unfinished story. I can't blame a parent who can't get on board as far as physical comics. Thank you very much for the $9.99 super chat. Again, this is obviously coming back to the price point being too high. You know, kids do have access to streaming channels right now. If they have a tablet or if they have a phone or have access to them, they have access to free digital games that are hours upon hours of time suck. And that's something that they have to compete with. Larry, what do you think about that? The competition is completely changed from when we were kids entering the hobby.
You're not wrong, but those free games exist in a space to chum money out of you a different way. So it's not a truly free experience. I play some of those games on my side, and like every so often I say, man, this is really annoying to play free. And if I just pay $5.99, it'll be less annoying for the rest of the month. But you're not wrong that there's not that experience, and kids aren't reading as much as they used to. And that's been why reading's been a major push in schools, and why the Scholastic Book Fair is a common refrain about what's going on with comics and the future of comics and getting comics into libraries is another talk. But we're not getting kids to read, and there's a whole lot of different educational reasons why we're not getting them to read. So it's easier to get into the games. You don't have to read.
Yeah, it's so much streaming.
Yeah, but I'll jump in on that one. So to that point, I remember as a kid, well, first of all, now we talk about STEM, everyone recognizes that reading and reading comprehension is essential for your kid to do well in school. But there was a time when DC used to have these books in the classrooms where you would learn how to read by reading these phonics-based comic books. I remember them to this day. I think it was Ross Andrew who did the art for it. I don't know who was in charge of DC marketing back then, but maybe they need to find that guy or his notes and start adopting some of these plans. It's like kids love this stuff. There's one company that does do this. I don't know how popular they are, where they create these comic books that basically communicate social studies lessons and stuff like that. But it's like I don't know who works at DC marketing. I don't know who works at Marvel marketing. But there are all these different ways in which you could integrate comics in a way that's valuable to parents, that gets these kids hooked on the medium. That there were these business practices from way back when I was a kid, I think either shouldn't have been abandoned or should be renewed and revived. But to that point about reading, there was definitely a program DC was doing at some point when I was a kid in the 80s, where those books were in the school, phonics-based books using comic book characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. So I don't know if that's a matter of will or legislation. I'm not sure, but they need to readopt that.
So thank you very much, Cliff Evilor. That was very generous of you. Also, we do have a super chat from Atomic Hound, $20. Very generous. It's not digital versus physical. It's comics versus other entertainment choices. Harness the power of all the platforms to complement each other. AT&T and Disney should be able to figure this out in an afternoon. Great discussion. Ash, speaking about, versus other entertainment, I was a big Clash of Clans fan or player for like 2 or 3 years. I was actually kind of somewhat competitive. I know you were a huge fan of Clash Royale. Like there are so many different types of entertainment outside of just streaming that kids can just play nonstop. They're competitive. It's hard to compete with, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest hurdle that comics is really having in the future is exactly that, other entertainment. And I think when I look back at like the success of the late 80s and the early 90s and that early boom, one of the biggest reasons I think so many people got into comics in that time is because comics became cool. It became something that people were like, this is awesome. I want to get into this. I can distinctly remember, like sharing with my friends and they're like, you collect comics? Isn't that weird? And I was like, yeah, it's, and then people started becoming aware, and Batman 89 came out, and it just changed the landscape. And people were just like, oh, Batman's cool, man. I want to get a Batman comic. And then we go to a comic store and they're like, this is neat. And like oh yeah, and you can collect them, and you have an opportunity to maybe it'll go up in price. And wouldn't it be cool to have a Superman #1? That'd be, we just talked about stuff like that. We were kids, but it was cool, and kids wanted it. Like, and that's the key, is the desire. You got to create a situation where even not even just kids, adults are a huge part of the industry these days. I mean, the bulk of it, really. I don't think many kids buy comics, but you got to make a product that people are craving to get. And I think that's like the resurgence of vinyl. Like, there was no marketing that said, hey guys, you really want vinyl. It was just people out there saying, I want this. Where can I find it? And then little niche, retailers started picking up, and it started catching on fire, and it just became a cool thing. You got to find a way to get back into the culture again.
What really took off for I was going to say the thing that really took off as far as vinyl is concerned was the incredible head of steam that came behind the hip hop community involved with vinyl. That they kind of said, we don't like this. It doesn't give us as much control over our music. We want, the DJs at the time were saying, we want to have better control of the music as it's playing. So, and they brought that vinyl back, as well as other bands like Tool, and just these particular artists that said, our music presents better on vinyl. We're going to push vinyl, and we're going to present vinyl as a premium format for our product. And boom, that's when it took off, and it set fire again.
And I want to jump on Ash's point about the cultural thing, because it cannot be denied or underestimated the power of that Rob Liefeld Levi's commercial. I don't care what anybody said, that sent the industry into rock star mode at that point. Everybody wanted to be him on TV. Everybody understood what that meant. It took what happened with Batman in '89 and just took it to the next level. It made superstars out of those guys. A comic book guy on a commercial nationwide for a major brand. That was crazy. That was crazy. And it was like it just brought an attention to the industry and to the product that I don't know if it can be duplicated unless you just have people who are just willing to lend their brand to the industry in that way.
Well, I mean, we've seen it with some of the we've seen people try that with like the actors that play these characters, give a little bit of lip service to the comics every so often, but it doesn't translate into anything. Nobody starts reading comics as a result.
But I think the Liefeld example is different, though.
Yeah, the
Liefeld is an actual comic guy who got elevated to the status of celebrity, as opposed to a celebrity telling you what to buy.
Yes, exactly. I think a lot of people are tired of celebrities telling us what to buy and what to do, but people are more interested in normal people from an industry being like, yeah, dude, I'm a fucking rock star in my business.
Yeah,
and everybody
like the last two guys they put on late night shows was like Brian Michael Bendis and Tom King. Is like, you can't find somebody cooler. So I do want to say thank you very much to Atomic Hound. Really appreciate that. That was very generous. We do have another a comment. This was from Jared Sanchez, and he says, I'm a guy who's been using DCBS for a number of years and don't feel like comic shops are essential to keep up with the hobby. Now, he somewhat has a point there. You don't really need a local comic shop. I don't have one. I have to do everything by mail. He's doing things by mail. Pele is, we're kind of losing shops, especially if you're not in a big city. A lot of people are having to become more reliant on DCBS and other mailing services like My Comic Shop, Graham's, and things like that, if they want to have access to physical comics anymore.
Well, it makes the hobby a lot easier though when you have one. I'll tell you that. You don't need a comic shop locally to really enjoy the hobby. But boy, like I said, it makes it easier. And you have a good shop that presents a good broad range of comics, vintage as well as collectible back issues, trade paperbacks as well as new comics. Somebody that hits the full spread like that, that can supply a whole community of collectors, with everything they need. So, but if you don't have that, you've got graham crackers, you've got your Midtowns, you've got all these other places that are available that really have improved as far as mail order comics are concerned. It's gotten, you know, a lot better since the 70s and 80s when you had Mile High Comics, and you may get what you order, you may not. So it's made a lot of headway as far as that's concerned.
I can tell you, my comic shop delivered my comics that I ordered from them here in the Philippines in much better condition than Amazon did.
Oh yeah,
Which just basically put it in a box, taped it up, and let them bounce around while they traveled across the planet.
Now, I will say one thing. Well, that is a valid point about the mail order services. They've improved dramatically, but there's something to be said about walking into the comic shop and because you know what, when you're ordering your stuff on DCBS, or you're pre-ordering through any of these services, you can see the cover, you can see the solicitations. You're essentially buying the same way that the comic shop owner or manager is buying. There's something to be said about being able to walk in, flip through something that you didn't pre-order, and then be like, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Because you're ordering 2-3 months out on a lot of these. I mean, some services do a little closer to release date, a little closer to final order cutoff. But like DCBS, you're ordering essentially 3 months out. You don't know. You might get sick of a book on the first issue, and you've still got, 2 or 3 more issues coming that you've already paid for. You can't cancel them at that point. That you're going to be stuck getting. Whereas you can walk into the comic shop, you can flip through stuff on the rack and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. And then you can kind of ease your way into pre-ordering it by putting it on a pull list, or, even if you use a DCBS, you're still giving the comic shop a couple of months of revenue on that 1 or 2 books. Because for instance, when Flash Forward came out, I wasn't entirely sold on it. I mean, I like Brett and I like Scott Lobdell, but I picked that up right off the shelf. I didn't put it on my pull list ahead of time. I was buying it off the shelf until issue 3, and then the last couple issues I had on my pull list because I wanted to just give it a shot. And that's happened to a lot of other books too.
Yeah, there's also something to be said. One of my best customers, was talking to me the other day. He said, if I could bottle the smell of this shop and buy it as a fragrance, I would spray my house with it all the time. And
well, that really depends on the comic shop, sir.
But it's that wood pulp, kind of sweet wood pulp smell with ink. It's that light chemical ink smell with aging wood pulp.
And
that kind of
smell, a lot
of
body odor
with a little, probably like a 2 or 3% BO from all the Magic players that are over there on the other side of the store. That gives it kind of like that hint of acidity to it. No, I'm just kidding. But it's also something about just that environment too. And the smell is part of it. The aging wood pulp especially for men is a very attractive smell. It's like, yeah, comics, yeah. So.
But it's the same thing like electronic shops are going through and appliance shops. It's all about shops that need to provide the right service to get people.
Wait, did we lose Larry?
Did we lose him?
Did we lose Larry?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
No, it was just a simple point that it's online shops versus physical shops, and physical shops have to make it a service, make it an experience to come in there, talk to a guy who knows how to sell propane and propane accessories.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think something that it doesn't get talked about a lot is community, though. I know that's kind of a weird word that some people don't like, but honestly, everyone that's here right now is all here talking comics because of the community. Like, not the community in the terms, but the sense of community. We all enjoy each other's company. We enjoy talking about the same subject. We all relate on some level to this hobby that we love. We share a similar passion and enjoy for comics. And I think if you strip that out of it, if you just make it the sanitized thing where I go online, I find my online retailer that sends me some books at a discount. I don't ever really talk to anyone else about it. I guess maybe there's some market for that hermit that just gets his comics, never talks about them, gets them at a discount. But I think for the vast majority of people, maybe I'm just speaking anecdotally, but the reason I like going to the comic book stores, I like seeing the regulars that I've gotten to recognize. I like talking comics. The reason I'm here with you guys today is I like talking comics. And if all of that went away, I don't know if I would want to have the enthusiasm of spending the money I do on the books that I buy. And I'm not even a huge buyer. I'm a budget buyer, but that adds to the enticement and the excitement. Because I walk in, I go, man, I spend way more on comics than I spend on other forms of entertainment, but it's worth it to me because of all the ancillary things that I get out of it. And the only way I know how to sum that up is community,
Yeah, no, and you're right, because what it is it's the thing of a shared communal experience.
I'm going with socialization.
That too. It's like if you're in a movie, it's like, I was the only one when Avengers Endgame came out, when Cap finally said Avengers Assemble, basically cheering and hooting and hollering. My wife and kids were like, "Would you be quiet?" But instead of having that, but I also remember when I went to a screening of when they were doing the Star Wars movies and re-releases, and we were all sitting there and watching the trailer, and you had this different kind of crowd where everybody knew every line from the movie. Billy D. Williams comes on, and somebody's making Colt 45 jokes and all this other kind of stuff. It's this idea of this community and this communal experience. Much like what I think to a certain extent went on with Hickman's X-Men. Was like, for a lot of people, including myself, X-Men was pretty much, for lack of a better phrase, a dead character brand. But the way he kind of revitalized it, and I'm not talking about going forward with all the emerging faults and flaws, but just that initial House of X, that House of X bit, I don't remember having this many conversations in my local comic shops talking about this book, about how he turned it around and what's going this and how that was cool and this or that. That was just as much of a draw for me going back into my local comic shop just to say, hey, what do you think about issue 3? What do you think they're going with this and stuff like that? It's what they call in marketing, it's called an affinity group. You have a group of people who love this medium, love this hobby, and even within there's different affinity groups who love collecting the vintage books, or maybe being a hermit and they talk to their one friend about it. But I just think that I don't think we're thinking about comics in a way that is moving it forward. So as Pele said before, we're in this entropy phase where there's just no creativity, there's no political will to say, hey, we've got this medium. And I'm going to say this because the reason why I'm so, for lack of a better word, proud of the MCU films is because I was that kid and that adult for the 10, 20, 30 years before this joint jumped off that was always making a point that comics are Americana. Superheroes are Americana. And when you see what has happened with the MCU, there's a part of me that a tear drops my eye because in some sense we've arrived. Now, it hasn't translated into the comics industry in terms of sales, but in terms of that idea that superheroes, comic books are important to American culture, that I think that has already been decided. The question is, how do we take advantage of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well
Superheroes they're not passe.
So the next question, or the next point in the comments, was from the Saurus. My opinion is that the industry needs to move towards printing straight to trade. If printed comics are very completed, phased out in favor of digital, I'm finding a new hobby. So he doesn't want to go digital, but he doesn't want floppies either. He wants trades. And I think this is another good point. I don't think every miniseries or every storyline needs to be offered up monthly. This, like the New Warriors miniseries, most diehard comic fans aren't going to be interested in that. It's for a different audience. Try that in trades. Maybe try it with a new audience. When they bring these YA writers in to do comic books at Marvel, like Rainbow Rowell, she actually has an audience that's not in the comic shop. Don't release that set of Runaways as a periodical. Release them in story arcs and throw them into Barnes and Nobles and see if there's an audience there for that. I do think not every comic book that's released today in floppy format needs to be released that way. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%.
I would like to say, though, that a point was really valid made earlier was the sampling idea. Like, comics already are too expensive to sample. And I think the reason why a lot of people are like, yeah, go to trade, that's what I want to buy. I understand that. A lot of comics I buy are old trades, but I have the luxury of doing that because someone was like, man, have you read Thanos Wins? That was amazing. I was like, yeah, I remember when it came out and I didn't get it, but everyone was talking about it. Hey, look, there's the trade at a discount. I'm going to pick it up. When you go straight to trade, I don't know what that is. Is that good? Is it garbage? I don't know, but I ain't spending $25 to sample it.
Like,
a lot of people think of it as people think of it as like a movie going straight to DVD.
Hold up. We need to say goodbye to Larry. He was going to have to jump out, 30 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes in. Thank you for joining us, Larry. Did you have anything you wanted to say about this topic before you jumped off?
I could talk about this topic for hours, but I did talk to a friend of mine who's working on the Ultraman comic for Marvel, and he said that Marvel was going to release it straight to digital, but they said to him that they wanted it in the comic book shop to give it the best chance of success. So keep that in mind when you're talking about, is digital or print going to win? At the moment, print's still in the game.
Yep.
Absolutely. I'm definitely getting Ultraman. My wife's favorite character.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to say something on this, the topic of the industry had this kind of figured out they started figuring it out really well in the late 70s and all the way through the 90s. They mostly had this figured out. You had the only thing that is different now is digital. You add digital in as well as another delivery mechanism. But they already had this figured out. Most of the stories happened in the regular monthly run. They didn't make the big stories into events that they pulled out of the monthly run. It just kept bringing, causing a rollover effect of new readers coming in whenever those big stories would happen. Books that they weren't entirely sure about got handled in like one-shot prestige formats or the Marvel original graphic novel line. DC had similar things, but the market had generally figured all this out. And then somewhere in the 2000s, they started fucking with the formula. And now you have this big confusion of, well, why does this need to be collected? Why is this not part of the regular series? Why is this why is there 9 concurrently running Deadpool or Spider-Man like mini series, none of which are really the ongoing? They screwed with the whole formula and they've never figured it out, but they won't go back because going back is an admission of being wrong, of screwing with it in the first place. So now they're trying to find something that works the way that it worked before, that isn't what worked before, because that would be an admission that leaving what worked before was wrong.
Well, one of the problems was Marvel, especially Marvel, got into their heads that they started running their company as if next month was going to be the last month that they ever published. So they would throw everything but the kitchen sink. They'd start up anything that they had an idea about, just as fast as they could possibly get it going, get it out there, just get everything that they can possibly out there, shove as many series as they can on the shelves, and sell it like there's not going to be a tomorrow. And instead of planning out in advance how to run series, for the next several years, because you'd have an ongoing series that would be, up to 200, 300, 400 issues where you're planning this out and you have these ideas for events along the way. No, we're just going to shove it into this series and this mini series, and we're going to do this, and we're going to sell as many comics as we can this month because tomorrow we may not have a company. And that's what's happened, and it's really driven the comic book, LCS owners crazy. It drives the customers crazy because they're not sure what they should buy and what, if I buy this, I can't afford to get this. What am I going to do? It's like a big, nasty, chaotic mess compared to what it used to be. And Doc's right.
Yes, I have a question because
it's a mess.
Yeah, drawing from reading in Comic Wars about this, when of course we all remember when Marvel went bankrupt, and one of some of the fallout, well, the main fallout from that was that they really switched to being a licensing and merchandising model over the comic publishing piece, almost to the point where it felt like they were using comics as research and development for licensing into other industries and for merchandising in general. Is that something they just haven't shed? They haven't shed that way of thinking?
Yeah, they've never shed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's part of Disney. How could they now? Because they're just the fuel that kind of the MCU probably doesn't need comics anymore, but it's the inspiration for the MCU. But they're not really even related anymore.
Yeah, but even prior to the Disney sale, they had kind of looked at what their core business was as more of an inconvenience to what they wanted their core business to be, which was all the secondary and tertiary businesses that they were in, with licensing and game development and merchandising and stuff like that.
Because today the DC's licensing income or revenue, the revenue generated on DC licenses is greater than the entire comic book industry revenue as far as new comic books.
Yeah. And I guarantee Spider-Man's alone, his merchandising is quite possibly more than, actually it is. I know that it's more than, because 5 years ago, Spider-Man's merchandising was more than the entire comic book industry. That was just Spider-Man only. It was over $1 billion in licensing just on Spider-Man. And that was 5 years ago. I guarantee it's even bigger now. So yeah, those secondary and tertiary businesses are often much more. They're more. They have a much higher return on investment. But the problem is they are not your core business, and they can't. You can never sacrifice your core business. Otherwise, all those tertiary and secondary businesses go away with it.
Mm-hmm. Eventually they do. It's just, you don't have anything to renew the base. So,
yeah. So no, but I mean, when it comes down to products and stuff, yeah, they've. I don't think it's that they look at it as it's not important. They just don't know how to prioritize it. Now, Disney, on the other hand, after the Disney acquisition, they don't look at it at comics publishing as even slightly important because they just don't care. They look at it like, well, we've already generated the IP. We've already got it into the public consciousness. It's not going anywhere. All we do is just keep it in the public consciousness. And the actual comic books don't matter. The only thing that they're there for at this point is R&D for new IP. The way that and that's why you'll see a lot of characters. That's one of the reasons why you don't see the way of introducing new characters the way it used to be back in the day.
Okay, so there is a discussion going in the chats about it as far as collectability and value. And one of the things that I think Trevor and Ryan are going back and forth. The reason Golden Age comics are so valuable is because they're exceptionally rare. A lot of them were recycled and things like that. But there are a lot of rare new comics because with the printing going to a digital model as far as the proofs and stuff like that, they no longer they can do a lot of different variants. So you will get very rare variants that are available on day one. And Pele, it's all about rarity when it comes to collectability, as far, also about the character and the importance, correct?
Yeah. I mean, they're talking about Golden Age comics being so valuable because a lot of them are. Now, there's some, if you had, like, say, Action Comics #1, there's like 52 copies of it that are known as far as that have been graded. There's about another 26 to 27 copies that have not been graded, that are raw. So you're looking at a book that has probably about 80 copies in existence. If there were 580 copies in existence, it would still be as popular, and values on it would still be as high because there's enough of a deep market there that people that are high rollers that want a copy of Action Comics #1. If there 10,500 of them, Probably not. You know, the price would get smashed down pretty hard. But you know, there is room for more there, but not like to to current market type quantities. Present day comics, we're going to look at this as a very interesting period in about another 30 to 40 years.
Wait, hey, like,
because
one interjection.
yeah,
What your point about the golden age stuff? What the rarity does is it just increases the value of otherwise what would have been common books.
yeah. You've got like Action Comics number 15. Nobody knows what happened in Action Comics number 15.
But
It has an iconic cover, but it's still not a key book.
But it's still
But it's-
thousands of dollars as a result of
Hundreds of
rarity.
thousands of dollars.
Yes,
yeah,
but as a result of rarity.
of
So
scarcity. Yeah,
yes.
that's what I'm saying. Some of them, yes. That's like I said to begin with. Some of them, yes. Most of them, I'd say yes because of scarcity. But there's some that if there were 1,000 of them, if there were 100 times more, the value of them would still be extremely high because of how important they are. But yeah, it's scarcity drives it up. Silver Age, there's a lot of Silver Age books. I mean, you look at some of the issues, even key issues, there are like tons and tons of certain Silver Age books. But the demand drives the value on there. It's not necessarily the scarcity because those characters are more pivotal to modern era stories. So,
But
It's-
the new method of printing has made so you can have very rare comic books day one.
exactly. Yes, and even the
50
regular
copies.
comics now are going to be scarce because you've got print runs of major titles of less than 10,000 issues. You've got major titles, 5,000 issues. You've got, and a lot, let's say 80% of those get thrown away and destroyed. You've got certain variants that are going to be iconic probably in 10 to 15 years that they're 80%, like I won't say 80% of those, but it's like 40% of those get destroyed. You're creating a market for the next 2-3 generations on. Those books are going to be scarce as hell because comics are still going to be popular. Those characters are still going to be popular. And this is going to be seen as a period of time where, the print runs were so small in comparison to how popular those characters are that it's going to be a scarcity for those books. So
Well-
yeah, there definitely are books now that are printed that are like, even the regular covers that are going to be hard as hell to find probably, like I said, 20 to 30 years from now.
well,
All right, so we do have two more comments from the video that we need to cover before we wrap this up. We're coming to the end. This is from Black Cat. Digital is an inevitability because the coming generation forward can't care less about the experience of holding a book, flipping through pages, and so on. We've covered this one certainly a little bit. I do not think digital is an inevitability like in the near term, but I do think eventually, new comics will probably just be in digital with the very, very small like print runs of things like Batman and Superman, the really important comics. But I think the majority of new comics, of characters that people don't really care a lot about will eventually come out in digital only. I know, Paley, you disagree with me.
Yeah. I think that the majority of comics will still be in print with some niche comics that, like New Warriors, that New Warriors thing, and, Squirrel Girl and stuff like that, and the YA type comics, they're going to be in digital format or they're going to be collected like in trade, but they won't be like a monthly floppy. And that's fine. There's a lot of books that don't need to be sold as monthly floppies.
I
But
agree.
I'd say the majority of comics, though, are still going to be in print. That's my opinion.
All right, so we do have one last question because we kind of cover that stuff, and this one's not all that nice. We'll wade into it. Publishers, Diamond, and stores have formed a devil's triangle for years, driving each other all down to mutual destruction. That's from Bobo Oyami. Doc, what do you think about our publishers, retailers, and Diamond all in it together, destroying the industry at their own mutual destruction?
They're all a kind of a mutual appreciation society. None of them will ever point out the mistakes that the other ones are making, and it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's the fact that none of them will stand up and point out what the other ones are doing wrong. Publishers are focusing on, all they're doing is feeding off the entropy of the existing comic industry. Diamond doesn't give a good goddamn because they're the only game in town.
Yep.
And all they do, and then stores are the ones that are caught in the middle, but they won't say anything, because if they do, they stop getting, comps, they stop getting invited to things, they stop getting, stuff like rare editions or variants that they can then sell.
Or Diamond gets mad at you and starts holding out your variants.
Yep.
Diamond gets mad at you and they start, not letting you reorder. They get mad at you and they won't complete your orders properly. Yeah, they say, "Oh, they don't do that." Yeah. Well, I've got evidence that shows otherwise. But
honestly, but regardless, they're a mutual admiration society and don't want to ever, like, they're just taking they're all taking the ostrich method and sticking their head in the sand, hoping that any problems that are there go away. Any problems that their neighbor's making, they'll just stop making instead of. But nothing ever improves because they don't actually work on solving any problems, because they don't think they've convinced themselves there are no problems, and everything that's out there is just a hiccup. Everything's going to pick up soon, eventually, magically.
Yeah, so there's a lot of magical thinking out there right now.
They're not driving each other all down to a mutual destruction. They're just not preventing each other driving them to it.
They're certainly not working together in unison to raise each other up. I think that is the real issue, correct?
Yeah, they're just not doing. They're not doing anything to stop the problem. They're not doing anything to really exacerbate it, but they're not really doing anything to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and this may sound like a plan.
We haven't heard from you in a while. Sorry.
No, I've been letting
Go
you
ahead,
guys. You guys have been talking and adding a lot of good points, and just trying to keep the economics of the discussion going. You guys have had. I mean, nothing more I can really add to what you're saying. It's all good stuff.
Hey, I'm sorry, Gervais. Did you want to? I know I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, this may sound like a bit of a platitude, but it requires vision and leadership. It requires somebody to understand, to see where this industry can be and where it needs to go, and be able to muster the political will to do it. Because, as Pele and Doc pointed out, it's just nobody's willing to say anything.
Yeah, we need a central comic book czar. We need a central comic book czar. We need Todd McFarlane to come out and say, "I'm in charge of comic books now, and I'm going to make an overall decision here, and you're going to listen to me, or I'm going to kick your ass."
The problem is, whenever somebody decides they want to be sheriff of comics, we get Mark Waid doing it.
We get McFarlane to do it. We get somebody that everybody respects.
So we find a guy that doesn't want to do it, and then force him to do it.
That's right. That's right.
What we need is companies who are just interested in making kick-ass product and not trying to just be like, wait a minute, I need to tell everyone how the industry needs to work. Just put your nose to the grindstone, make your product, and then the customers will come. If you make something awesome, you don't need to convince them of what they should be buying, how their buying habits should be, what should be cool. We don't need people to tell us what to do. We just need
not the customers to do.
Right. But we just need cool stuff. And that's what's happening in the modern times. It feels like there's so many people in the industry that want to be like this authority of how we buy comics, how we interact online, how we talk, what subjects we're allowed to be about, what the characters need to be like. All this stuff's like, no, we don't need a bunch of comic moms. Right.
My point was basically just not for the customers, and not even for the stores, but just for the companies to say, okay, you need to write good stories.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
With compelling characters in all these formats. And by God, if you start junking your PC crap into this, and you start, causing problems, and you start getting on social media and being an asshole, you're out. You know, we're going to cater to the customers. We're going to offer customers these products, and we're going to have great stories. And anybody that's against that can just suck it, you know, and just draw the line and say that's it.
Yeah, I like to say this because I think Perch makes a good point about this, and I believe it was Ash who was saying it's like, in terms of when we've done research for anime concepts of doing this, every retailer I've spoken to, every customer I've spoken to, the bottom line is always the comics have to be good. At the end of the day, the comics have to be good. Then the other part where I think Perch talks about it is you do need to have people in the industry who understand more of the business of it and are trying to at least guide people towards the business part of it, not the content part of it. That has to be something where publishers in general have to do comics, but there's things in how do you, once you get that good product, how do you create an infrastructure that makes sure as many people get exposed to it as possible? And I think that's what you're not seeing from the publishers, Diamond. I wouldn't say the stores. I think most of the stores that I go to, local comic book shops, they do a great job of creating an experience, if you will, or just having a good experience in general, doing a community thing. I can understand why a store might not say nothing when there's a fear of retaliation, but you know, at some point, and I think because Perch brought this up in his video, was that Marvel's silence about this with this current thing we're going through. They're the market leaders. They're the ones who have to, even if they don't do everything, they at least got to light the torch and signal and point the way. They don't have to. Yeah, they don't have to police everybody, but you know, where are we going with this thing?
Hallelujah.
They have as much as the gain or lose as anybody else does. So, you know, it is. I would point people to it, and I want to just go back to one point. There's a book, Eisner Miller, that came out back in 2005, which I encourage people to pick up when we talk about perceived entertainment value, especially if we were talking at one point about the Disney Plus thing, where you know a comic book is basically $2 less than a Disney subscription, and it comes out with the same amount of frequency. It's just things like that where someone has to take a hard look at that and then say, how are we going to right the ship? Because I agree, I do not think we need to have as many titles as we had beforehand, and I think in some things it's been a blessing for the companies to kind of focus in and just make good books. Wes, the point you made about bringing in a YA author onto a title in a direct market, that to a certain extent is a business thing. It's like that, and someone, I think it was Ash, made the point earlier. It means you don't know who you're selling this to. Animated concept, as we're doing it, I understand basically from listening to you guys over the last couple of months, has every opportunity to be perceived as a quote unquote woke brand. So if that's the case, I have to be savvy enough to realize if I'm going to enter that market, either to deflect that, soften that image, maybe not sell as in certain stores in the direct market at all, or just come up with a different strategy for messaging what the brand is about. But if no one's doing that kind of thinking, you are always going to be in this state of entropy, always, because you're not doing anything different. You're not thinking about it different. But Marvel and DC, they're the ones who basically, we look into you. What are you going to do? And then we'll see how we come alongside it and get this done, whether it be readers, retailers, or creators.
Well, Gervain, this is your first appearance on the channel. I think you've made an impact. Atomic Hound wants to know, how can we get more info on your publishing initiative moving forward?
Yep. Not a problem. What I'll say is that I will rely on Wes.
Where can they find out information? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have a website?
Social media? Anything?
We don't have the website yet because we just got capitalized. But I would say at some point we'll get the word out. But look for Animated Concepts. We're trying to get the domain name animatedconcepts.com, so it'll be out of that, or animatedconceptsllc.com. But we will try our best to use channels such as yours to get the word out about it, get in touch with us. We just got the capitalization for the company, so we haven't been able to establish a presence on the web at all yet.
Where can they follow you on social media? What's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle, you know what? That's a great question. So y'all talking about you guys Twitter, about Facebook. Well, Facebook is just my name, Gervain Dargan, GEVIANDARGAN. And then I'm gonna bring up my Twitter real quick.
There
And
you
I'll give
go.
you
People
my
can see
Twitter
the
handle.
name once I take this banner off. Oh,
Yeah, you got it. And then in terms of the Twitter handle, it's the same thing at Javane Dargan, GEVINDARGAN. Trying to keep it simple.
All right, we will
Yeah.
put that in, and we will retweet that out today. And look
Okay.
for Wes and mine and Doc's Twitter accounts, and we will link you
Okay.
to his Twitter account, and you can follow him.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. And I like to say, I know we're wrapping this up, but I just like to say this. This has been a blast for me. As my wife will tell you, I do YouTube pretty much from the morning, into the evening, precisely because of channels like this. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this conversation. And again,
Pleasure
I
was
want
all
to say,
mine, dude.
It has been an honor to have you on this week. We have
I
very
appreciate
much
that.
enjoyed our conversation with you, buddy.
Yeah, and I thank you guys for, again, you don't have to do this. Giving this kind of information and insight, people don't have to do it. And for it to be available, not behind a paywall, is I'll say that it's a blessing. So I'll say that.
well, I do appreciate the time. Hopefully, this isn't your only appearance. I just followed you on Twitter. Hopefully, a lot of other people do. I will be in touch, and we'll definitely be trying to get you on the channel again. And thank you very much, Ash. I'm sorry. It feels like you didn't get your shit in today, but I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Well, that sounded really weird, Wes. But yeah, I really did enjoy the conversation. And I had opportunities to jump in, but like I said, a lot of times you guys are making some great points, and there's no point in me just saying all the same things. So I this is a topic that's actually very important to me. I'm glad I got to participate, and got to meet a new friend, hopefully. And how is it you pronounce your first name again? I missed it.
It's Javane, so it's
Javane.
kind of like I always typical Javane. It's like weather vane. So my dad's name is Eugene. Is Eugene his middle name? They called him Gene. My mother's name is Vivian. They slammed it together, but then didn't follow through phonetically.
All right, that's cool.
And so thank you very much, Ash. Doc, obviously my co-host, my partner in crime. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you had a good time.
Word.
Yeah. And Pele, as curmudgeon-y and critically is always pretty salty today, but I think we got a lot of good conversation, a lot of good dialogue out there, and I think people really enjoy it. Do you have anything you want to say before we wrap this up?
Wash your ass.
Wash your ass.
There you go.
Wash your ass.
Visit your local LCS. If you don't know where your LCS is locally, look them up. Make an effort to try to reach out to them. It's an awesome experience. It's still as good as it used to be. So just do that. Make me a promise this week that you're going to go. If you haven't been to your LCS in a while, that you're going to try to make an effort to go and visit them sometime the next week or so.
And on Monday, Perch, who was not here today, we have a very good conversation about SJWs in comic books and stuff like that. And we're going to talk about that. I think that's going to generate some conversation. We're going to talk about that topic here on Comics Aficionados next Saturday. So I already know what the topic's going to be. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. Salamat Po, wash your asses, peoples. And I'm out of here.